Thank you very much, Rich. I want to take a moment before I start my remarks to thank you and Tufik, Stephen, and Sarah, and the rest of your remarkable team. You guys do the Lord's work, and we're deeply, deeply grateful during some very dark times for the Armenian people. IDC stood shoulder to shoulder with us, and that's something that we'll always remember and are deeply, deeply grateful for. We saw in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, the very types of aggression that has become all too familiar in the region, in Syria, Iraq, everywhere in the, let's say, the old Ottoman neighborhood. We're seeing a pan-Turkish drive at the expense of everybody else, and this is nothing new. This is what happened to the Armenians in 1915 and the other Christians, the Syriacs, the Chaldeans, Arameans, and others in Anatolia, in the present-day territory of Turkey. They were viewed as an inconvenient minority that needed to be eliminated as the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, and they were destroyed almost entirely, with the remaining survivors, exiled and scattered across the earth. That was a crime of opportunity under the cover of the First World War. Very much the same way, Turkey and Azerbaijan took advantage of some timing. They looked at a global pandemic. They looked at the tail end of a U.S. administration, the inattention of the world due to other factors, and they decided this was the time to attack Artsakh, which is as ancient a part of the Armenian homeland as exists. It's been Armenian for thousands of years. It contains some of the earliest holy sites of Armenian Christianity. So they saw the timing, just like the Kemal and Enver and Jemal Pasha did back in a century ago, and they took their shot with very, very advanced militaries, fourth generation drones, massive numbers of troops, odds on the order of something like 30 to 1, 50 to 1 in terms of numbers, in terms of military spending, in terms of technology, and to take out one of the last remaining parts of the world that still contain an indigenous Armenian population. And we lost Kars and Ardahan and Dikran and Sebastian, where my family's from. All these were taken from us to the west, and now vast areas of Armenia to the east have been seized and depopulated by Azerbaijan with Turkish backing, with the backing of foreign terrorist fighters recruited by Turkey from Syria. As an Armenian, it's like heartbreaking. As an American, I'm really deeply disappointed in the U.S. response. It was articulated, I think, most honestly by the U.S. National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, who came and met with Armenians in California during the war, and said, "Look, I have a lot of Armenian friends." And the first time, anytime you hear, if you're Armenian, if you hear somebody start a sentence with "I have Armenian friends," the rest of the sentence is not going to go well. And he then proceeded to say, "Look, we know the Armenians are the victims here. We see the aggression that's being perpetrated by Azerbaijan, but we're not going to do anything about it because that would mean that we're not neutral." And I guess in some, very narrow and I would argue twisted sense, that is neutral. If you, see 10 people beating up one person on the street and you continue walking, you can adopt a posture of I was neutral in that fight, regardless of the odds, regardless of the intent, regardless of the motives and the weapons used and the terrible suffering visited upon that one person by the 10 people. And that signal was understood very quickly by Turkey and Azerbaijan because they now knew that there would be no response, that they could do whatever they wanted, and the U.S. policy would be, we're not going to take sides because that would forfeit our neutrality, which is ultimately, I think, what happened. To the extent that the U.S. in the past could have put the brakes on something like this, they signaled early on that there was absolutely no intent to do so. The media fell into a both sides kind of trap, which is that, both sides. It's just, who's to say that they're fighting? No one knows who started it. No one knows, what the issues are. So let's just assume that everything is equal and that we can blame both sides. It would be, like something like Pearl Harbor and saying, well, there were shots fired from both sides. Who's to say who started it? So why don't we just blame everybody and then just write it off and move on? That false neutrality certainly was prevalent in terms of our government policymakers, among our government policymakers, and also in the media, even some of the human rights groups that we look to for for a strong stand. But there were many who did stand up, and IDC I count chief among those. Also, the Philos Project, thank you to Robert Nicholson and others. He collected a very large group of like faith-based leaders who spoke strongly in support and in defense of Armenia against these terrible, terrible odds. Michael Rubin traveled to the region and has written very eloquently and persuasively on the subject. So that's where we are. This is not unlike 1915, where there was sympathy and there was some support, but the higher up you go in the system, the less support you got. And the feeling, I think, among Armenians is basically that, well, lesson learned, terrible, terrible lesson learned at a massive cost of upwards of 30% of the area in which Armenians are indigenous still, and but a sense of abandonment in the face of this existential threat, and which is ongoing. We still have prisoners being taken, tortured. They're being abused on social media as if it's a sport. In some places in the world, if captured, helpless civilians were being tormented, having their ears cut off or their head cut off, that might be something that the society would want to hide. But apparently in Azerbaijan and Turkey, these are points of pride, and all over social media are these terrible, terrible atrocities. We're working our best to get the prisoners back. We're working to encourage the U.S. and others to monitor the churches that have been taken. If the history of the last 100 years in Turkey is any guide, there will be some rhetoric, but very little action. Our focus right now is very much on assistance, is getting a $250 million aid package to Armenia to help with the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands who have been displaced by this conflict. There's been massive economic harm to Armenia's economy, and this will reverberate for years and years in Armenia. And U.S. assistance is needed where we couldn't, or where we didn't, rather, as Americans step forward to do something meaningful during the war. Perhaps we can step up now and help the widow and the orphan of this conflict. We're also taking a careful look at U.S. weapons, U.S. parts and components, technology that were discovered in the Turkish drones that Azerbaijan used to kill Armenians. These are called Bayraktar drones. Several were shot down. They were opened up, and they found 8 or 9 different components clearly labeled with component numbers of the U.S. firms, of Garmin and Xilinx and Viasat and a range of others. And we would like the Congress and the administration to look into that and to research any potential violations of U.S. law. It's one thing for Turkey and Azerbaijan to kill Armenians, and that's horrific in its own right. But one step worse when U.S. parts and technology are complicit in those deaths. So we're active on all those fronts. I know that the speakers today will speak to the situation in Iraq and Syria, and there's a lot in common here. We have basically a Turkey that is feels unrestrained in any meaningful way by the moral sentiments of the world, by the pressures of the international community. They've organized the Rubik's Cube. They've organized their geopolitics such that they can today, get the Europeans to back off, get the Americans to remain silent, get even the Russians to join in with them in some regard, and to just exercise a vastly aggressive policy, much of it at the expense of Christians. And in some ways we see the strength of our collective movement to stand up against this type of thing, but also in other ways we see the challenges that remain before us, because Turkey, for all the talk, and this is for all the talk about caring about the plight of Christians abroad, we didn't see any material action based on that whatsoever, and even among folks that we counted as our friends. And so, if maybe a wake-up call, painful one at a huge cost. So I wish I could share a more upbeat message this morning with you, Rich. But these are dark days for Armenians. I think for all Christians across the region. Thank you.